So this lecture is about job order costing and how these systems are used to track material costs in the manufacturing process. So the point of this lecture will be to describe how these systems track more specifically material costs and how those material costs are recorded in ledgers and a very simple example of a journal entry. So to start, cost accounting systems, again, they're used to measure or record different types of product costs. There are two different distinctly types of systems. You have a job order system and a process order system. Think of a job order system as a system that tracks individual costs for those products that are distinguishable, so you can actually see the difference between the two products. And process cost systems are more used by manufacturers where those products are indistinguishable, like chemical companies and oil refinery companies. So as I stated, those systems are used as far as job order costing are used to track the cost of materials. Those materials can be raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. But for this intent, we're going to show how it's used to track materials. Again, process cost systems, which is not what I'm going to cover in this lecture, are used by companies where, again, the indistinguishable characteristic of the product is the main difference between job cost systems and process cost systems. So let's jump into an example. Like we talked about in Chapter 16, inventory is broken out into these three distinguishable sections. You have your manufacturing operations, you have your product costs, which are your direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. And then you have your inventories, which are your materials, work in process, and finished goods. And just doing a quick overview of the manufacturing process, which again we covered in Chapter 16, you have your raw materials, and then your work in process. Again, I always distinguish that by saying this is the work on the conveyor belt. And then it goes from the conveyor belt to a finished product, and then from the finished product, it's actually shipped out to the customer, which are considered finished goods. But by then, we're using a category of cost of goods sold to measure what goods we've sold from our inventory based on our production process. But the key distinguisher here is that each material, as it's ordered, received, and used, is tracked in a materials ledger. And that materials ledger, as you can see, follows the same category as we use to distinguish our inventories. We have our materials inventory, our work in process, and our finished goods. And each of these categories hold their own ledger to track where things are being received and where things are actually being utilized. So just to step through a quick example of that, a receiving report, if you will, would be used to show goods that have been received from a supplier. And those goods would actually be checked against the supplier invoice to make sure that if a supplier said that they shipped 20 units, that we actually received 20 units. And when looking at the ledger report, we can see in that middle column is showing any materials that have been used, but the far left column, titled Received, shows that we've received $10,500 worth of materials for a quantity of 750. And so far it looks like we've utilized $13,000 worth of these materials over the course of 12 days in December. Looking at this a little bit deeper, those materials that we did use, again, since we have the three categories of raw materials, work in process, and finished goods, now what we're looking at is the category of work in process, which is showing us that for those materials, as you can see on the left-hand side, for requisition 672, job 71, it's showing us that those $10,000 or $2,000 worth of materials or 200 units are being used for job 71 on the bottom. And as you can see, it's being categorized in the direct materials category. Likewise, on the left, for requisition 704, job 72, that $11,000 worth of materials is being categorized under job 72 under direct materials. Again, nothing's been working yet, nothing has been produced, but they made a requisition saying we need these raw materials in order for us to start working on producing our goods. In this case, those goods are guitars. So again, the receiving report is prepared to show when materials have been ordered and received, and there's a reconciliation process to make sure that things are in line with what we actually ordered and what we actually received on the books. The journal entry for this is very simple. Is we are familiar with increasing assets. We know that in order to increase an asset, we need to debit. In order to increase a liability, we need to credit. So we know materials, even though it does fall under inventory, is considered an asset account. So in order to increase that asset account, we will debit materials for $10,500 and credit accounts payable for $10,500. And pretty much this journal entry is showing that we received $10,500 worth of material from our supplier, but we owe them $10,500 because we ordered these materials, as we would say, on account, meaning we didn't pay them cash when we received the materials. We'll pay them on a net 30 or a net 60, depending upon the terms set forth by the supplier. So as you can see, again, there's more reconciliation here. The storeroom, when they receive a requisition, will fill this out and say, okay, these folks need 10,000. I keep saying 10,000, $2,000 worth of materials, or 200 units of materials, and this will be costed to the job that's stated. So if I'd say, for example, I was working on the floor and I was working on job 71, I would fill out a requisition to receive 200 units of this maple wood, but again, there would be a cost associated with it in order to keep track of our inventory costs. And this job cost sheet, again, just showing you when that requisition is made, that those materials that were transitioned from our inventory account to a specific job will be carried in direct materials. And that direct material category, again, is showing we've made a requisition for raw materials, but we haven't actually started the work. We're going to start work on building guitars based on job 71. So in order to show that, again, a summary of materials requisitions, we can show that to transition our costs from raw materials to work in process, again, the slide before this showed us actually requesting the materials. In order to do that, we know work in process, as we stated in Chapter 16, is still considered an inventory cost. So that inventory is going to go up, but we're just moving it from one category to the other. Materials and work in process are just categories of inventory, so we're moving the $13,000 from materials into work in process. And again, to increase an asset, we debit. To decrease an asset, we credit. So this is just showing the job moving from one stage to another. So that pretty much concludes that slide. I went very, very quickly only because a lot of the material in Chapter 17 is what we covered in Chapter 16. We'll dive into more detail of how we will track costs more specifically. We went over materials, but we'll talk about factory overhead and other costs related to the manufacturing process. But as graduate students, as MBA students, it's not about going through the journal entries. You've probably covered a lot of these journal entries during your undergraduate. This is a process of more of critical thinking. So what I want you to do is I'm going to post an article on Canvas. And what I want you to do is read through the article and think, if you will, as if you were a construction manager for this company. It's a home building company that's experiencing rising costs. And I want you to think about how you would adjust your pricing to accommodate these increased costs. In a lot of cases, companies will either pass that increase of pricing to their customers, or they'll adjust, trying to go and find other vendors to lower their price or production costs. So what I want you to do is kind of think about, as a manager, how you would approach this and explain your answer using some of the concepts that we've talked about and related to material costs in the chapter. This assignment will be due the day of class, the same day of class by 11:59. So what I would like you to do is take the class time. We have 2.5 to 3 hours of class time to read through the article. The article is really short, and post your answer to. There's going to be a supplemental assignment out there under the assignments tab on Canvas, and post that by the end of the day of class, whether or not you're my Tuesday or Wednesday class. If you're Tuesday class, post it by the end of the day Tuesday. If my Wednesday class, post it by the end of the day Wednesday by 11:59. And then what we'll do is we'll start class off and talk about it, and then jump into the next material. So I hope this helped. I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Bye-bye.